Mat Nieves, I am with MeetElise. We are an AI company that uses natural language processing and automation technology to automate a lot of the leasing process. Our goal is to help on-site teams shift their time and energy, reallocate those resources away from CRM, away from their email inbox, and focusing on the things that matter most, driving incredible customer experiences and driving revenue to our properties. AI has been a buzzword, especially in the last year. You cannot go to any webinar, any conference, any internal meeting without hearing AI. And so we're going to talk a lot today about how did this come to be. I'm going to give you a little refresher on what the heck AI is. There's a lot of misconceptions out there. We're going to talk about natural language processing and the application to the leasing process. And most specifically and importantly, why this technology isn't going away and why this technology needs to be adopted now. But before we get there, I'm going to take you through story time. That's right, we're going to go through story time, paint a little picture as to the history and background of all this tech. This story takes place maybe 2018, 2019, kind of blurry years. But prior to MeetElise, I was at a little company called Zillow. And Zillow had built out a multifamily division right around 2015, and their goal was to provide transparency into the rental marketplace, make it really easy for renters to find and engage with communities. And two of the coolest things about working at Zillow was, one, no matter what role you had in the company, if you had a great idea, you were encouraged to explore it, and if it was worthwhile, you were encouraged to lead it. The second really cool thing about working at Zillow is they were customer obsessed. Everything had to do with the end user. And we had this persona for renters. Her name was Rachel the renter, and every conversation when it came to product and sales strategy and marketing boiled around what is the right thing for Rachel. And so 2018, 2019, I'm making a trip out to the New York office. I'm checking in with the team, and we're talking, and there's a sales rep there. He'd been there for a while, and he's very known for some crazy ideas. And he approaches me, and he says, I've got a good one. This one's going to change the game. There's a couple companies out there. It's not really widespread yet, but how do we take Rachel beyond our landing pages, beyond ads? How do we help guide Rachel through the process? Lock boxes. We need to get self-guided tours going in multifamily. We need to be able to have Rachel go on her timeline. She's busy. She's going to school, or she's working 9 to 5, or she's working who knows how many hours. She's got a lot of things going on. She doesn't want to wait until the weekend and take up her weekend time for a tour appointment. So if we get lock boxes and we put them on every building and we can help guide through Rachel, this is going to be an incredible win-win for everybody. And I said, yeah, that's amazing. That is incredibly exciting. What is this thing called? And he said, wait for it. I'm calling it Rachel After Dark. And I looked around to see who was listening, and I said, I'm sorry, what? And he said, I'm calling it Rachel After Dark. And I said, maybe we don't call it Rachel After Dark. That sounds weird. But he decided to run with it anyway, very confident, and he went to go pitch some Zillow executives on Rachel After Dark, and I'll never forget this conversation in my life. He comes back to me, and I said, well, how did your pitch go? And he said, well, two things they said to me. One, absolutely not. That is a PR nightmare. We're never going to call something Rachel After Dark. Two, they said, absolutely not. Nobody is ever going to allow prospective residents into their buildings on their own, especially after hours. This is 2018, 2019. Why is this important? Because the reality is a lot of the technology that we're adopting today and we're utilizing at scale went through this very critical process of scrutiny where everybody said, yeah, in theory, that sounds cool, but it'll never happen. And this is very much the case with AI and PropTech in general. PropTech is another buzzword that wasn't around as much 5 years ago, and now every day we hear PropTech, PropTech, PropTech. As of recent, this year, there is over 2,000 PropTech companies that service our industry. This is very much the reason why many of you got hundreds of emails a day last year that said, in these uncertain times, you definitely need to buy our technology because of X, Y, and Z. Because there's 2,000 of these people talking to you. And a lot of these companies are utilizing AI in some way, shape, or form. And that is because it is very much the future. A recent study and survey of CEOs globally, when asked, what is the technology that you think will have the biggest impact on the real estate industry, artificial intelligence won out in a very big way. This is why you're starting to see AI populate every one of our emails, every one of our seminars, because a lot of folks think that this is the future. Now, AI, again, it's almost like a bucket term at this point, right? Anything that has a conversation, anything that generates an automatic response gets labeled as AI. And so at MeetElise, one of the challenges that we face from our sales team is being able to clearly distill what is AI and what is not AI. And so for those in the room that might be a little less familiar, we're going to go through a quick rundown. At the core of this, artificial intelligence uses computers to mimic problem-solving and decision-making capabilities of the human mind. What the heck does that mean? If you look at this slide and you think large data sets plus AI equals solutions previously unsolved problems, and you're like, what does that mean? Let me boil it down, because it took me a while to grasp this concept too. The best way to think about what AI is, and we'll use natural language and conversational AI as an example. The best way to think about what AI is to think about a human brain. More specifically, think about the brain of a baby. An infant is born into the world, and they know nothing, right? They have no clue what's going on. All they have is exposure to things. Sounds, sights, smells, words, sounds. I said sounds already. Over time, as babies continue to be exposed to these things, through parenting, through TVing, YouTubing, iPadding, whatever the case may be, babies start to associate these various things with words. And they learn that this means hot, and this means cold, and this means stop, and this means go, and this means mama, and this means dada, etc. Those words start to combine over time with additional parenting and guidance, and they become sentences. And at some point, and I don't have children, but I think it's around like the 3 or 4 mark, they start having full-on conversations with you, and they are human beings. AI is very much the same way. You can think of what we've done at MeetElise as creating a computer version of a brain. And we sit on millions and millions and millions of conversations specifically from multifamily renters. And our team of engineers in-house trains this brain to understand exactly what it is a renter is saying or asking for throughout the course of the leasing process. So much so to the point that when a prospect says, hey, Elise, I'm interested in a 2-bedroom flat, our AI has been trained to understand now that within context of this conversation, flat doesn't mean that they want a flat piece of real estate. It means that they're asking for an apartment. They may be coming from the UK. This is not exclusive to natural language or conversations. This technology is applied in every which way possible, right? When we think about image optimization, there are a lot of companies that are focusing on how do we get the best image or the best image quality. And this model applies in very much the same way. We load it with millions and millions and millions of photos, and we tell the AI or machine learning model, this is a good photo, this is a bad photo. This is an okay photo, this is an exceptional photo. And over time, this machine learning model understands, okay, I know how to identify what a good photo is, and I can either suggest the photo that you should use for your ad, or newer technologies emerging for AI to create its own content based on what it's learned and been trained on in the past. And going back to the conversation AI and kind of the buckets that a lot of things fall in, there's 2 things that you've probably come across if you've done any type of evaluation in this space. Decision trees, or the more commonly referred to chatbots, and actual AI, natural language processing. Everybody has a bot, and last year everybody capitalized on their bots, and bot was an easy way for people to say, yep, we have AI. CRM companies, ILS companies, little chatbot widgets, etc. We all had AI, and to some extent they're not wrong. They are automating processes. There is some learning involved, but a chatbot is a very rudimentary, watered-down version of AI. It is very simply a decision tree. A prospect asks a question, or they click on a button, and it is a very binary response, yes or no. Yes, we allow dogs. No, we do not allow dogs. Yes, we have availability for September 15th. No, we do not have availability. And the conversations continue as such. Natural language processing does away with the decision tree model. The idea is to create a very organic conversation that replicates or mimics the conversation that a leasing agent would have with a consumer today. And it allows for AI to take a series of questions over email or text message, or in some cases voice, and digest this information and produce an actual conversational response. And it looks something like this. Today, we communicate primarily over email and text, and our goal, again, is to replicate this, the necessary communication, the necessary experience that a renter should go through when they're going about their apartment search. We know that renters are not just looking at our buildings, right? The reality is they are coming armed with a criteria, with a budget, with a location that they need to be in. And they're reaching out to the 3 to 5 communities that all fit the bill, and they're taking a step back and they're saying, all right, who's going to take my money? I need to get through this process in 30 to 60 days. It's very stressful, and communication is a big part of this. The ability to replicate that communication and remove it from our on-site teams so that they can focus on the actual in-person interactions is critical, and it doesn't happen with a chatbot. We have to say, hey, we have exceptional leasing agents. How do we just copy them? How do we clone exceptional leasing agents? And it's through conversational AI. And when it's done correctly, and that is a key term to walk away with, when it's done correctly, something really, really magical happens. You don't just replicate the conversation, you replicate the outcome, the desired outcome, I should say, right? What you're seeing on the screen are actual snippets, they're excerpts of prospect conversations that Elise has had in the last year or two. And one of the most fascinating things that we've seen is, for the most part, when renters are engaging with this AI, they really don't realize it. She's getting accolades like, you deserve a raise, girl, or thanks again, you've been a great help. Whatever they're paying you, ask for double for replying at 1 a.m. These are the types of conversations and outcomes that become unlocked when you utilize technology like NLP. And this was very much a nice to have before, right? We thought about AI as like a cool tool, but you know what? We've been doing this for a long time. What we've been doing has worked. Outside of the pandemic, multifamily has been very strong. We're kind of back to that sentiment this year, I think, in some cases. A lot of us are saying, this is the best year we've had in multifamily ever. I think we'll be all right. But the reality is, a few things have happened that have kind of changed the game. And if I could distill maybe the 2 devices, if you will, that have radically changed the landscape and kind of forced this adoption, one of them is this beautiful thing, right? It is the both the most effective and important tool and also the bane of our existence. This tool has made it so that consumers expect that they can push a button and have magic happen. They push a button and an Uber is right in front of their door in 5 minutes. They push a button and they can order a TV and have it shipped in 2 hours. Everything can be done from this device, and now I'm conditioned to expect that I can do that anywhere. This thing changed the game, and it's been around for a while. This isn't news to you all, right? We've all heard about mobile kind of changing the way that we do things. The second device, though, is this thing, this necessary thing. This came into our lives last year, and it turns out when you wrap this and you wrap this together, it is a perfect cocktail for what I would just call forced adoption. We knew that consumers wanted better experiences. We knew that consumers wanted faster response times. We had an inkling of an idea that consumers wanted to be able to do self-guided tours. And then this happened, and all of a sudden it was a must-have. Consumers needed this type of technology because there wasn't a lot of choices. But the reality is, again, it's really us now coming to this conclusion, right? And I've heard it said in many panels before, many sessions prior to mine, that we have been, as an industry, a little bit slower to adopt technology, but consumers haven't. They've been experiencing machine learning and AI behind the scenes for decades now. We talked about Uber. Netflix is using machine learning to serve up the movies that it thinks that you will like the most, right? Spotify does the same thing with its suggested playlists. Based on everything that you've listened to, what you've liked, what you've disliked, these are the songs and the artists that you should listen to now. Alexa and Google are probably the most comparable in this space, with Alexa being an actual voice AI assistant and Google having the same. And both of these companies have moved beyond just answering questions, right? That was the fun party trick to do at the time. You had an Echo Dot, and you could tell it to play music. You could ask it the meaning of life. Very cool, very cool. And now, these devices power your home. You can turn on your lights, you can set your thermostats, you can lock a door, all through this very advanced AI technology. It exists everywhere. You walk into Best Buy and you can go down an aisle and you can buy a slew of machines that are built with AI. This is the consumer mindset today. Again, I can push a button or I can speak a word and my hopes and dreams are answered. And I'm not just saying this, and I'm not just using these big logos to this. The data shows very much so that people are engaging with AI technology in a rapid way, and for the most part, they have no idea. This is this behind-the-scenes technology that's driving the show. As a consumer, you just say, wow, I can't believe this. This is incredible. I can't believe that I got a response to my apartment question so quickly. How could this be? It must be that this person deserves a raise. No, it's just this really cool tech that we built. And so before, and I think still very much so now, the experience when you click that button on a Contact Us form, whether that's Zillow or Apartments.com or your property website, when you're reviewing websites, a lot of times, data is inaccurate. I know this is the bane of every one of my marketing partners. The pricing's not right on Apartments.com. The amenity information or fees are not listed correctly. Now I have an upset prospect. This is the state of affairs, and it has been for quite some time. And it's very challenging for a prospect. They're looking at your websites, they're looking for information, and it's just not there. They want to move through the process. They want to move on their timelines, and they don't want to drag this out. They want to do it quickly, but it's just not there. And what AI unlocks for our consumers and for our business is the ability to take all of that heartache, all of that pain away. Instant answers, instant calls to action, and the ability to move through the process on your own. And I think it's important to call out, we don't do self-guided tours, but we're very interested in self-guided tours. Because again, this was like a nice pipe dream early on. And a lot of us adopted it last year because we didn't have a choice. But consumers are engaging with this in a way that we didn't expect, at least I didn't personally expect. This year alone, close to 40% of prospects that engaged with our AI, and to give you some kind of sense of volume and breadth there, we service close to 700,000 units across the United States. So we're talking about thousands and thousands of prospects a month. Almost 40% of prospects chose a self-guided tour this year. Now, this is staggering to me because, again, Rachel After Dark was the craziest idea ever. Nobody will ever, ever, ever do that. Here we are in 2021. And a vast majority of prospects are choosing to go this route. I think Liv Gabrielson over at Bainbridge spoke earlier today, and she was talking about meeting the consumer demand, right? We will win when we listen to the consumer. And so when we couple AI with technologies like self-guided tours, this is where we're kind of changing the game. This is where we see this incredible advancement, not only in our technology, but in our business, when we're listening to the consumer and saying, hey, yes, they do want to move through things quickly. They do want questions answered in a timely manner. They do want to be followed up with. And they also want to complete this journey on their own. But it's not just consumers, and it's not just the bottom line that is desperate for this technology. It is our on-site teams as well. You've heard it more than most, right? We are stretched thin. Bandwidth. Bandwidth was probably a very common term that was used last year alongside masks and vaccines and AI. Bandwidth. We have no more bandwidth to do the job. We are in a very weird job market right now, and a bit of a weird economy where labor shortage is a real thing. And we talk to customers all the time that tell us we're losing leasing agents, we can't backfill leasing agents fast enough. Thankfully, we have some technology to rely on, but this labor shortage is a real thing. And it weighs on our business, and it weighs on the consumer, but it also weighs on the minds of our on-site team members. On top of that, take that labor shortage and say, hey, we're not going to stop the marketing, though. We are going to pump up the marketing because we need it. Whether that is PPC or ILS spend, et cetera, our teams are seeing an unprecedented amount of leads come through their way. And what do you do with that? What do you do with that when you don't have the human bandwidth, so to speak, to manage these things? And we all know what it means, right? We've been talking about lead leakage and prospects falling out of the funnel for many, many, many years. But the reality is today, more than ever before, without the right technology, we're missing a ton of leads. We know that prospects are getting very frustrated because we see it in our Google reviews, we see it in our Yelp reviews. We know from our own personal experiences. Last year, my wife and I decided to do something crazy. Move during the pandemic because there was all these concessions out there. And yes, we got 4 months off on our lease. But going through that process then and even before was awful. There was a lot of us having to follow up, a lot of us having to try to get a tour scheduled on a books. Even after a tour, there was a lot of us calling back the community to say, hey, we're like ready to go. We saw the unit, we'd like to move, and nothing. So much so that in one instance, I emailed the COO of a local New York real estate company and said, hey, this is where I live now. We're trying to move to your building. Can't get a hold of anybody, but we're like just ready to sign at this point. P.S., by the way, I work at a company that solves all this. He never took the meeting with me, but he did finally get the leasing agent back into the conversation. But this is happening today in a very big way. Conversational AI addresses a lot of this, right? Getting questions answered quickly. AI is able to follow up and nurture prospects so that it's not just an initial response and not just an initial inquiry that's being addressed, but when prospects ghost us, so to speak, AI allows for that follow-up that's necessary to re-engage renters. But the conversational aspect is only one piece of it. The conversational aspect is what everybody's selling right now, bot, 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 chat, chat, chat. And yes, that is very helpful. But automation plays just as big, if not a bigger part in creating an exceptional experience, right? Because we can have all the conversations that we want in the world, but the reality is there's a lot of back-end work that has to be done to successfully move a prospect through a process and to ensure that our reporting doesn't get screwed up. And so think about this. When we dissect the leasing process, we say to work one lead effectively, just one, it should look like this. When that person clicks the button online to submit their information, we have SLAs in place, right? We try to get back to people as soon as humanly possible. For some groups, that's ASAP. For some groups, that's 2 hours, 24 hours, whatever the case may be. We have these goals and benchmarks in place. Get back to that prospect's original question. If you're doing it and you're making a nice little custom email, that might take 5 minutes. The reality is prospects are just as busy as we are, and they're going to send their information. They're going to go off to La La Land and go back to work, etc., and they're going to forget to reply. And so then we tell our agents, hey, follow up with this prospect and set up your follow-up task reminders in CRM on top of that because we'll be watching. And when we follow up with prospects and try to re-engage them, again, that's another email, perhaps that's a call, that's another 5 minutes. Finally, a prospect comes back and says, awesome, thanks so much, I am so sorry, here's my life story, I'd like to schedule an appointment. So we pull up CRM and we pull up the calendar and we see what's available and we schedule that appointment for them, another 5 minutes. And then hopefully, remember this is about working the lead effectively, hopefully, at some time prior to the tour, we tell our teams, hey, call that prospect back up, remind them that they have this showing coming, confirm with them and share any relevant details, and if they need to reschedule, you can do that because we want to reduce the amount of no-shows at our community. There's another 5 minutes. Then they come in for the tour. That tour could last any amount of time, but typically, let's say 30 minutes, and that's our team's time to shine, right? We say, yes, you have to do all of those things, but really, really focus in on this. This is where we win them and they become residents. A lot of prospects will view our apartment and they'll love it, but they've got other things to see. They've got partners to check in with. They leave our community without signing on the dotted line. And then we say, okay, team, send another follow-up and follow up again until they either tell you we're not interested or they're ready to apply. This entire process to work one lead effectively takes just about an hour for one single lead. None of our communities are getting one lead. We're getting hundreds in some cases. And so this is where the problem begins. It's, again, wonderful to have the conversational tech there, wonderful to be able to answer and address those questions quickly, but there's this entire cycle of task management that occurs behind the scenes that we cannot negate. And that process can't be broken. It is critical. There are not too many touch points in there that you can do without and feel really good about the job that you're doing and feel really good about the results that you're yielding. When we look at our data, Close to a quarter of the prospects that engaged with our AI and scheduled an appointment required follow-up. This is the biggest missed piece in any leasing process, is the diligent follow-up. Whether the best practice or expectation is not in play, whether there's a bandwidth issue, or whether we're under the assumption that prospects, oh no, you don't want to be over salesy here, you don't want to follow up with people. The reality is a quarter of people needed that gentle nudge before they could take a tour. And again, that gentle nudge, especially in volume, is what bogs our teams down. The other thing is what happens when we go home for the day. We have operated on our hours since the beginning of multifamily time. Everything happens within leasing office hours. If not, you get shipped to a call center or a voicemail, or somebody's going to get back to you tomorrow morning, maybe. Renter behavior is changing in a big way. Again, these two things have driven that. Renters work 9 to 5. The majority of renters now work from home, which means 9 to 5 doesn't really exist. It's like kind of just never-ending Zoom calls until you go to sleep. And so when do you begin your search? When do you possibly have time? Well, the logical thing is after hours. After we're already home for the day, renters are reaching out. And about 40% of our renters that engaged with our AI this year were reaching out after the hours of 5 p.m. And so this process, number one, we lose out on that immediate engagement. We lose out on the personalized response. We don't have the ability to move the prospect through the process because we just say no. We don't have that functionality today. And so what happens to those prospects? Well, again, they're looking at 3 to 5 different communities. There's a good chance at this point they're going to land on someone or somewhere that is engaging with them at the time that they want to be engaged with, right? AI is here for a very long time. AI is now a part of our blood. It is a part of our ecosystem. We have seen incredible groups embrace and utilize this technology at scale, and that's not going anywhere. So if you are the community across the street that says, we're good, this is the best year in multifamily we've had in 10 years, we'll work 9 to 5, the reality is you're just losing out on leases because we're not listening to consumer expectations and demand. And what happens when you implement AI, and think about this for a second, right? An hour to work every lead effectively. What happens when you implement really robust AI that is working to automate the process, every one of those dots before goes away. It is completely stripped off of your leasing team's plates. The engagement of a prospect, answering questions, gathering additional details like expected move-in date and desired floor plan, following up with prospects, right? We saw in a couple slides ago that it takes, for some prospects on average, 2 to 3 different follow-ups before they schedule a tour, and that happens with about 25% of prospects. That can be done through AI. The right AI is integrated with your CRM calendar and is looking at that for availability, and it's scheduling appointments for your team. And then 24 hours prior to that scheduled appointment, is taking care of the confirmation and then following up for the tour. So what's left for the teams? The most mission-critical activities, truly what we hired them to do in the first place. Wow other humans, right? We hire the best of the best, and now more than ever we have to be very competitive, and we hire people for a skill set that lends to being customer service oriented. We hire leasing agents because they're great sales professionals, because they're great with our residents and our prospects, but we also tell them, on top of that, do all that other stuff. Well, when you automate all of that other stuff, what's left are the human interactions. Higher quality showings because in the back of your mind, you're not thinking, oh my gosh, I have to go clear the queue after this. Higher quality resident engagement and a stronger focus on renewals because you're not thinking about all of the leads that CoStar is going to dump in your queue in the next hour. So truly, this technology has changed everything for us. It has changed the way that we think about consumer behavior. It has changed the way that we think about operations. It's changing the way that we think about our staffing models. And as this technology continues to be embraced at scale, I hate using this analogy, but it's true. It will truly become a blockbuster versus Netflix situation. We must adapt to consumer demand and expectation. Technology is the only way to do that. Think about that workflow slide. That is not scalable. You couldn't hire an army of human beings to work every single lead effectively, so we must turn otherwise. All right, this is my time. I want to thank everybody so much for giving me the opportunity. Couple quick takeaways. Remember, this thing is here to stay. AI is not a fly-by-night technology. It is here and it is growing rapidly. This isn't anything new, even though it's new for us. Prospects have been engaged and expecting this technology for quite some time. And this isn't about cutting jobs. This is about reallocating our team's time and talents to focus on those really important, mission-critical, revenue-generating activities. And at the bottom of all this, right, and why we're all here to learn, is this has a direct impact. When we listen to consumer expectation and demand, when we listen to our leasing teams, when we adopt technology and work to become more efficient, all of this impacts NOI. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your conference. Enjoy Miami.